Okay, so we can get started. I'm very happy to have Professor Eran and Eldar here. Eran started, Eldar started his way in medical school. Actually, then did his PhD with ELSC in Princeton, followed by a postdoc in Potsdam UCL with Peter Dayan and Ray Dolan. And his work really uses an impressive range of methods to study the algorithms underlying goal formation and specifically how emotion affects or modulates our decisions. And I guess you're going to be talking about that part, so thank you for coming.
Thank you. Hi everyone, very happy to be here. I apologize in advance, this talk might not be as polished as I would like it to be. This is completely new data, first time presented. And also, I had a daughter born 6 days ago, so that kind of delayed preparation. But I'm very excited about the ideas and the findings that were presented, and I hope you will be as well. So, our goal in our computational cognition lab, essentially like any cognitive science lab, is to try to understand what is this, these algorithms that people use to map sensation to action. But I think what sets our lab apart a little bit is that we really take seriously the need for the constraint that these algorithms should be able to explain real-life behavior and real-life experiences, including the perceptions, beliefs, habits, values, preferences, and even the emotions and moods that we experience in daily life. Now, obviously, the field of cognitive science has coped with the problem of ecological validity pretty much since its inception. But I would say that specifically with regards to emotions and moods, for the most part, they have been ignored. If you think about, for example, the science of the study of learning and decision making, it evolved entirely separate from the study of emotion. And in my mind, that's actually quite strange, because when you think about it, the researchers of emotions try to explain pretty much the same things that researchers of learning and decision making are trying to explain. For example, the way that we form evaluations, the way that we form judgments, the way we respond to stimuli, behaviorally and physiologically. And emotions are involved in learning and decision making in very systematic ways. When we try to evaluate outcomes, we feel certain kind of emotions. When we meet challenges and learn from them, we feel other kinds of emotions. When we try to decide what to do, we think about the future, we feel other kinds of emotions. But you can still say, well, usually the two main objections that come up, the first one is that, well, maybe emotions are just epiphenomenal. We can study the algorithms in question without thinking about them, and it will just, if anything, it will be simpler and more effective. And the second objection is that we don't really have any precise way to define emotions. And it's true that in psychology, people still debating what are emotions and what emotions are, and so on. So I'm going to essentially present a framework today that that can help overcome these problems and also illustrate the benefits of accounting for emotions in cognitive science research. And there are two main benefits. The first one is quite straightforward. A lot of our behaviors are either driven by emotion or involve emotions, and there are, for example, a lot of maladaptive behaviors are the result of psychological problems that are essentially constitute emotions. Like if you think about phobias, that is a certain kind of fear, and bipolar disorder can be understood as a series of extreme emotional states. So if we can't explain these emotions, our cognitive models are not going to be able to explain these real-world behavior phenomena. So that's one benefit. The second one, and the more important one in my view, is that's what I found is that once you try to account for emotions and the way that they interact with learning and decision making, that feeds back on how you understand learning and decision making, and essentially guides you to revise the basic algorithm. So we're going to see that in this talk. That's what I'm going to try to illustrate in this talk, and the talk is going to be composed of three parts. The first part, we're going to set up the computational framework that we're going to use. Then we're going to talk about the role of mood, and then the role of two particular distinct emotions. Okay, so let's start from the computational framework. A key property of emotions is that they are valence. That is, they almost always feel good or bad to varying extents. Right? So to model emotions, we need a computational framework that has this concept of goodness or badness built into it. And when we think about the kind of major classes of machine learning algorithms that exist, then supervised learning involves matching the correct output to each input. So the driving concept here is not really goodness or badness, it's correct or incorrect. Unsupervised learning tries to find regularities, statistical regularities in the data, so it's more driven by the concept of common or uncommon. Lastly, we have reinforcement learning, and here learning is driven by reward, and that's exactly what reward signifies. It signifies what is good or bad for the agent. So that would be the natural framework to model emotions in mood. The reward function, so it signals what's good or bad for the agent. To know how rewarding an option is going to be, the agent usually needs to try it out, and the agent tries to make decisions that would maximize its expected reward. These properties of the reward function are mapped quite neatly onto the psychological concept of pleasure and pain. So pleasure, psychologists think about pleasure and pain as signaling to us whether our current experience is doing us good or bad. And to know how pleasurable something is going to be, we usually need to try it out. So for example, think about trying out new food that you've never had before. You can't know how pleasurable it's going to be before you try it. And there are works suggesting at least that people make decisions that maximize their expected pleasure. So it's not surprising maybe that even the pioneers of machine learning, like Alan Turing, Sutton and Barton and so on, colloquially equated the computational concept of reward with the psychological concept of pleasure and pain. But there's also empirical evidence showing that anhedonia, which is an inability to experience pleasure, is associated with a reduced subjective value of reward in reward learning tasks. And opioids, which enhance pleasure, also enhance the subjective value. So this gives us a firm place to start, a computational framework that seems appropriate. But pleasure and pain, I should say, they're not considered emotions in themselves. They're considered, but many consider them as the core of all emotional experience. So what we're going to do, we're going to draw the parallel to reinforcement learning, and then we're going to ask what kind of computations, emotions, and moods could mediate that would help a reinforcement learning agent maximize its reward. And we're going to start with the topic of mood. The data that I'm going to present here is the result of a 5-year multi-site collaboration with Alec Dubrovsky at the University of Pittsburgh and Michael Holquist at UNC, and led by a PhD student in the lab, Alon Erdman. And to set up the basic algorithm, I'm sure most of you are familiar with reinforcement learning, but to set up the basic algorithm, we're going to use this squirrel as an example. So this squirrel likes acorns. Acorns, that's its reward. And each time it comes to this tree, it gets, sometimes it gets 2 acorns, sometimes 4, sometimes 3, and so on. And in reinforcement learning, the value of visiting this tree is defined as the expected reward, so the expected number of acorns in this particular case. And that's important for the squirrel to estimate, because that's going to determine how, whether it makes sense for it to invest effort to get back to this tree and so on. And so how can the squirrel estimate it? Well, an efficient and optimal algorithm involves updating its estimate every time that it gets a new observation based on the reward prediction error. So the reward prediction error is the actual reward, R, minus the expected reward, which is our current estimate. So that gives us the reward prediction error. Then we multiply it by a learning rate and use that to update the estimate. That means that if we're positively surprised, we update our estimate up. If we're disappointed, we update our estimate down. Why is there a learning rate? The learning rate is between 0 and 1, because if the reward is variable, we don't want to just use the last observation. We want to integrate over many observations, and a lower learning rate helps us do that. So the more variable the reward, the lower the learning rate should be. Now, this prediction error, which drives this learning, is important to us for this, for present purposes, because, well, first of all, just to say that, as you probably know, these prediction errors have been, they manifest in the activity of dopamine neurons in the brainstem. Very easy to detect in humans as well, using fMRI, in the reward learning test. We see them in the ventral striatum, the area that receives dopamine innervation from the brainstem. But, and here this is an important point, I think. There is data to suggest that what dopamine actually represents is not the reward prediction per se, it's the value update. And we think that because the dopamine, the reward prediction error signals is modulated by the variability of the reward. So exactly like you would expect from if it was multiplied by the learning rate. And these value updates are important for the present purpose because they are cumulatively encoded by our brain. So in control experiments, we see that reward prediction, that when you ask people how happy they are, then their level of happiness reflects the recent prediction errors that they experienced in the task. And the same has been shown with respect to real-world outcomes. For example, exam scores. So people's mood reflects not the actual score of the exam, but it reflects the difference between the exam score and what the student expected to get. And in a specific experiment that dissociated between prediction errors and value updates, it was found that mood is better captured by the value updates than the reward prediction. So this suggests that beyond value learning being an inherently affective phenomenon that is driven by pleasure and pain, mood serves a specific role in this process, which is to encode whether our situation has generally been improving recently or getting worse. And this understanding of mood has an important implication. It means that our mood fluctuations don't just follow our daily experiences, how rewarding they were or unrewarding. They could also be influenced by the way that we learn from reward, right? If one day we have a higher learning rate, then those same experiences would have a bigger impact on our mood. Now you can ask, well, why would we have a lower learning rate in one day, a higher learning rate in another day? Well, one possibility is that the present mood itself could influence the way we learn from the world. For example, we might respond to experience differently when we're happy, when we're sad, and so on. And if that is true, you can see how either a positive or a negative feedback cycle would emerge. A negative feedback cycle would serve to limit mood fluctuations. A positive feedback cycle could make mood fluctuation more extreme. In prior work, we did actually find some evidence for such a positive feedback cycle in some people, because we found that manipulating mood affects learning and striatal responses to reward in a manner that is consistent with a positive feedback cycle, specifically in people that report themselves to be relatively emotionally unstable, so people who suffer from extreme moods more. But how can we really test this hypothesis? How can we test whether this process shapes people's mood fluctuations in real life? To answer this question, we developed a mobile app that combines a lab-like experiments that people do while being connected to EEG, mobile EEG device and a mobile heart rate sensor. And the app also asks people about questions about their daily lives. So participants reported on their daily lives and on their mood and daily experiences 4 times a day, and they played a reward learning task twice a day. 318 participants completed the experiment, each one for 28 days, and this gave us over 30,000 mood reports, where each mood report consists of 7 dimensions. You have valence and arousal here, and here 5 specific kinds of moods. And we reduced the 7 dimensions using factor analysis into 2 dimensions of positive affect and negative affect. And in addition, we also asked people about their daily experiences. So every few hours, they reported about activities and experiences that they had in the last few hours, and they rated each one of them in terms of how good or bad was the emotional impact of those experiences. Now, of course, if they're reporting their mood and also the experiences at the same time, there's going to be a very close correspondence between their goodness or badness of the reported experiences and the mood that they're reporting at the same time. So to this.
These 2 factors, these are orthogonal?
These are what?
Are these orthogonal factors?
No, they're weakly positively correlated.
Or positively correlated?
Yeah. Sorry, negative
right.
correlated. Yeah.
Okay.
Negative affect reflects anxious, anxiety, sadness, and irritability and valence. And positive affect reflects elated, energetic, and also valence. And there's a weak negative correlation between them, but there's a lot of unshared variance as well.
I would have imagined probably like something like an affect as one dimension and something that is very or cognitive affect like arousal or whatever, that something like that would be the other dimension.
Something like what would be?
Like arousal or
Uh-huh.
that would be
Yeah,
another.
so the way that people understand positive and negative affect is that if you're high on positive affect, then it means that high valence, high arousal. If you're high on negative affect, that means low valence, high arousal. And so these two factors are essentially, you can take the valence arousal axis and rotate them, and you get these two factors. Okay. So now the question. So to dissociate the rated experiences from the reported mood, the question that we asked was whether the experiences can predict future mood beyond what could be predicted by the present mood. And doing this analysis showed that they definitely can. The experiences, having better experiences, more positive experiences, predicted a reduction in negative affect up to 48 hours later, and also an increase in positive affect. So this establishes the relationship between experiences and mood fluctuations. But now we want to ask, does reward learning modulate this relationship? So to ask this question, we had people do a reward learning task. Each trial, they choose between two images, and then they get either win a coin, lose a coin, or don't win or lose. And people learned about different images every day. Some images always not always, but more usually gave them reward. Some images usually lost them a coin. Some images half of the time won a coin, half of the time they lost a coin, and some images usually they didn't win or lose. And each image appeared on 2 consecutive sessions in learning trials, and thereafter only appeared in test trials where we asked people to choose between images that they learned about previously. And in those test trials, we didn't show the outcome to try to avoid further learning. So participants did 144, 2 sessions per day, 144 trials per sessions, and this gives us a total of over 2.5 million choices. Just to show you that people did the task quite well. First of all, they changed their choices as a function of the last outcome. So if they were rewarded, they were more likely to repeat the same choice. And if they were punished, they were less likely to repeat the same choice. The more they encountered a given image, the more accurate they became in choosing between the images that are more rewarding and less punishing. And in the test trials, even though the test trials took place on average 6 days after learning, then accuracy was still quite high. And also the participants' performance was relatively stable over the course of the experiment. So we didn't see very meaningful practice or fatigue effects. Now, okay, so our next job, therefore, is to estimate the degree to which participants learn from reward in each session of the experiment. To do that, we use a Bayesian reinforcement learning model. To save time, I'm not going to go over the specifics on the model. I just want to say that it has session-specific learning parameters for reward and punishment. And these 2 parameters behave similarly with respect to the analysis that I'm going to show you next. So we're gonna average them. So we have a single reward learning parameter for each session of each participant. And now, the big question is, do these parameters modulate the influence of experiences or mood? And indeed, we find a significant interaction. Specifically, if you look at this time window between 48 and 72 hours, you can see that the interaction between parameter and experiences in predicting future mood literally extends the influence of experiences on mood, both in the domain of negative affect and in the domain of positive affect.
Just a clarification for the experimental setup. I understand that the population that we use has to be somewhat homogeneous culturally and interpersonally.
No, actually no. I didn't say
because,
that.
No, I'm asking because I'm just thinking that the way some cultures react to different things. So Europeans might be very enthusiastic, which is a very small amount of enthusiasm for somebody from this region, or anger, or even between people. So there's some normalization that is there. So if you do some normalization, is it on purpose that you chose a heterogeneous population?
So we didn't. Our homogeneous is actually our population is actually heterogeneous. It involves both community, just kind of a general community sample, and also some of those 318 people, about I would say about 70 or 80, are recruited from a pool of borderline personality disorder patients. So these are people that specifically tend to have more extreme emotions.
So you were interested in the average.
Mm-hmm.
And the trend of the change.
Just to say, we'll get to that just in a moment, because I'm going to talk about individual differences to some extent. But to get to that, I want to point your attention to the fact that the influence on negative affect was a little bit stronger, and this suggests that potentially enhanced learning also could enhance negative affect more than positive affect, and thereby leads to overall negative mood. So to test this possibility, we looked at the direct relationship between learning and future mood, and we indeed found that enhanced learning predict an increase in negative affect 48 to 72 hours later, exactly the same time period. And for positive affect, that effect was not significant. Importantly though, and that gets to the individual differences issue, this effect, we actually only saw it in people that are high on the neuroticism. So people that suffer from negative emotionality in their lives. For people that are low in neuroticism, we don't see that at all. So this effect doesn't exist. Okay? So this is one, you can think about it as one potential mechanism that can explain maybe why these people have strong negative emotions in their lives. But before we talk about that, we still need to look at another thing, which is the relationship between present mood and present learning. Right? I didn't show you that. And when you look at that, you see that negative affect, present negative affect, was coupled with diminished learning, but less so in neurotic individuals. So to give you the full picture of what this means, in the average person, the learning enhances negative mood, but negative mood diminishes learning. So there's a negative feedback cycle here that limits the extent of negative mood. In the neurotic individual, the learning enhances negative mood even more, but negative mood doesn't diminish learning. So we have two reasons why negative mood is extended in these particular people. So these findings, they support this bidirectional interaction between mood and learning, with potential consequences for people's well-being and mental health. But value learning is not the only, it's not the only learning process that involves emotions. And that leads us to the third part of the talk about distinct emotions. The work that I'm going to talk about here was led by Levi Solomon, who's sitting here, a PhD student in my lab, together in collaboration with Aviv Emmanuel, a former postdoc. And to motivate this part, I want you to imagine going to a new restaurant that just opened where you live with a group of friends. And each one of you orders a different dish. And then you find out that all dishes taste worse than expected. Okay, so in this particular case, your disappointment is captured adequately by this computation of value updates, right? You're going to update, you're going to decrease your expectation of this restaurant as a result. However, let's consider another scenario where what you got tastes as you expected, but what your friends got was really great. Well, in that situation, you are going to feel some kind of disappointment in the choice you made, right? Missing out. But you're definitely not going to decrease your expectations. If anything, you're going to increase them. The disappointment in this case is captured by a different computation, and that is the computation of advantage. The advantage that your chosen action conferred over and above the value of the state from which the action was taken. And this advantage computation can also be understood as the difference between the value of your chosen action and the values of all the actions that you could have taken, each weighted by the probability that you would have that you assign to them based on your action selection policy. So this computation of advantage drives a form of learning, a popular form of learning called advantage actor-critic learning. And this is an algorithm that's supported quite well by recent works, both recent works on decision making and works on human emotions and moods. But it likely involves different kind of emotions as compared to value learning. When you think about value learning, then we're talking about emotions that don't necessarily concern, they don't form judgments necessarily about this or that actions. They just update our expectations like sadness, happiness, excitement, being depressed, being deflated. They're just signaling us whether things are generally getting better or worse. When we think about policy learning emotion, then the likely emotions that take part here are emotions that form concrete judgments about behavior, being content about the results of our behavior, or being frustrated about them. And this kind of means that when we experience a positive surprise or a disappointment, we sort of have two ways that we can respond to them. Or maybe we can also respond with a mix of these two ways, of course. But one of these ways might predominate in different situations. And in some cases, we could feel that the surprise, the prediction error, is due to an action that we committed. So if we change our policy, we could change the outcomes as well. So in that case, it makes sense to respond with action-oriented emotions that would drive policy learning. On the other hand, if we feel like it's not dependent on something that we did, then all we can do is update our expectations. And so in that case, value-oriented emotions would be more appropriate. So the key variable, the key variable that should arbitrate between these two kinds of emotions is the degree to which outcomes can be controlled by our action. Whatever we think this controllability is, should have consequences for how we behave subsequently. If we think that our actions don't have much control, so we just update our expectations, well, in that case, if we are positively surprised, that means that there's more reward to be had. What we can do is it makes sense to become more active. Whereas if we're disappointed, that means there's less reward available. So in that case, it makes sense to become more passive. By contrast, if we think that our actions are responsible for the outcomes, if we are disappointed, then we should actually increase our effort, try to find another way, maybe try harder, and try to improve the outcome. Whereas if we are content, well, maybe we can achieve the same outcomes with less effort. So the prediction of this model is that there's going to be an interaction between the cumulative reward prediction errors and controllability in determining the degree to which people invest resources. I should add that the prediction errors themselves can also be used to estimate controllability, and that is going to be the case in the experiment that I'll present to you next. So in this experiment, participants started at a given location, and their aim was to get to the location of the treasure, and we defined controllability as low as high if you can just catch a ride to the location of your choice, or low if you cannot catch a ride and you just have to walk to the nearest location, so you can determine where you get to. And subjects, every trial, they decided whether to purchase tickets to the rides or just opt out. And there were different kinds of environments. There are high controllability environments where control was elastic, meaning the more tickets you purchase, the greater your control. There were high controllability environments where control was inelastic, so it didn't matter how many tickets you purchased, you had high control. And finally, there were low control environments where it didn't matter whether you purchased tickets at all, it was better not to purchase any tickets, because anyway, you probably wouldn't get to catch the ride. And during this task, we asked people, after they observed the outcomes, we also occasionally asked them how they felt on two emotion scales, one with value-oriented emotions, the other one with action-oriented emotions. And that's the basic design. So first, let's look at the general, before testing our hypothesis specifically, let's look at the general effects on the emotion. I'm not going to show you all the behavior, the choices that people made. But I can report that people were able to learn the controllability of different planets and respond, make choices adaptively according to which environment they were doing that. But what's very interesting right now is the emotions. And in terms of the emotions, we can see that being in a high control environment, whether elastic or inelastic, made people both more content and more excited, which makes sense because when you can control where you go, you're more likely to get a reward. But when we look at the difference between action and value-oriented emotions, we see that controllability shifted favored the action-oriented emotion. That is, it made people more content than it made them excited. So this is one way of measuring control, the controllability of the environment, but we can also think about whether people assumed control. Did they opt in on the particular individual trial? And when they did, they again, were both more content and excited, but the assuming control shifted the influence of getting a positive outcome towards the action-oriented emotions. Now, this is kind of summary statistic. It's not a direct test of our hypothesis. So to remind you, our hypothesis is more specific than that. It's saying that controllability should modulate the influence of prediction errors on the degree to which people purchase tickets and opt in, right? So first of all, we need to see whether prediction errors even influence the people's emotion ratings. So we designed a model, a computational model of the task, extracted the prediction errors from that model, and indeed there was a strong relationship between the cumulative prediction errors from that model and the reported emotions for both emotion scales. And these cumulative prediction errors explain the emotions better than just taking the last prediction errors, and also better than replacing prediction errors with just outcomes. And now the question is, is this relationship modulated by controllability? And indeed, we found that it was modulated by controllability, but both types of control, the environmental controllability and the assumed control. And so here you can see that opting in shifted the influence of prediction errors towards action-oriented emotions, and so did the environmental controllability. As an aside, I kind of quickly note that these influences were also correlated with the individual differences in psychological trait. Specifically, we saw a stronger impact of prediction errors and a weaker modulation by controllability in anxious individuals. We can discuss why that may be discussed. This is an exploratory finding, but what's more important is that this result supports the idea that controllability modulates the relationship between the cumulative prediction error and these two emotions, and now we can test whether this is also reflected in an inverse mapping between prediction errors and resource investment. So regressing people's opt-in and extra ticket purchases on the reported emotions, we see that, as you can expect, when people were more content and excited, they also opted in more and purchased more extra tickets. But, and this is the important part, when they were more content than excited, they purchased fewer extra tickets. And there was also a trending effect with respect to opting in the same direction. And this is an analysis outside of the model, but the more importantly is when we integrated this effect we have a model that tries, like running model comparisons against many other models in explaining people's choices without taking emotions into account. When we add this effect into the model, then it helps us explain additional variance in the opt-in and extra tickets decision. And it does so in exactly the predicted way. So the more the balance shifts towards being content as opposed to excited, then the less resources people made. These are from the fitted parameters. These slopes are from the fitted parameters of the model. So this supports the kind of our general hypothesis, but it also gives us a potential way to use emotions as a theoretical construct to analyze behavior, even when we don't have access to people's reported emotions. Because the model tells us precisely how to compute emotions and how they should influence behavior, right? So to test whether that is actually possible, we used a tennis data set. Tennis is particularly suitable for this purpose because there is publicly available data that is extensively reported. Each tennis match is composed of dozens of games, where and within each game, the game can be closed, in which case what you do matters more, or the game can be lopsided, in which case you have lower chances of actually influencing the score if you change your policy, right? So controllability changes over the course of these games. And tennis players get, anyone who watches tennis knows that many players get visibly emotional and their performance fluctuates during the game. So we acquired this large data set. We divided it into two so we can replicate each result. And the data sets are pretty similar in terms of each one of them includes thousands of matches and hundreds of players playing in them, about equal numbers of male and female matches, a bit more male. In both data sets, maybe that's not surprising, the most represented player is Djokovic. And you can meet all the familiar, all the usual suspects are here, like Serena Williams and Federer and so on. And so how are we going to use our model to analyze this data? Well, first of all, we need a concept of prediction error, right? So for the prediction error, we need a prediction and an outcome. The outcome is simply, did you win or lose the given point? The prediction is given to us by a set of coefficients that represents a player ability, deviations from that ability in that specific match, and whether the player is currently serving or receiving, because there's a higher chance of scoring a point when you serve as opposed to when you receive. So these coefficients give us the prediction together with the outcome that gives us the prediction error, and adding a parameter for individual update rate gives us the cumulative reward predictions experienced by each player. How do we define control? We define controllability as the change in the probability of winning a game if you change your ability, like increase your ability or decrease your ability. So we think about, potentially a player can invest more resources or fewer resources in particular points. Resources could be physical, could be mental, and thereby increase their chances or decrease their chances of winning the next point, right? Or winning the game in general. So that's what we computed as the controllability. And this calculation shows that control is higher when the game is closer, which is, I think, is quite intuitive. And the model predicted whether the players, which player won the next point and what was the serve speed. And the hypothesis is that there's going to be an interaction between the cumulative reward prediction and controllability in predicting this outcome variable. So first of all, to show you that...
Sorry, a question?
Yeah.
Can we go to the previous slide? So how did you get this change in player ability?
We just take this coefficient, the player coefficient, and we sort of artificially increase it or decrease it, and we see how the probability of winning the game changes.
But that's coming from the data, right? Like
the coefficients?
No, so the coefficients probably come from the player's history, etc.
They come from the data. They're essentially fitted. I mean, it's a Bayesian inference, but...
Right, but this, you're computing, the controllability, you're computing from the data, right? So the change in the probability of winning a game for the given change in the player ability. So the change in the player ability is something that you are artificially injecting?
Yeah.
And how does the change in the probability of winning or losing come about from there?
We just use the model and change the player ability.
Also, this is a prediction. So if you change the player's ability, then your model predicts whether how much would be the delta P.
Yeah.
And that's what you are using.
Precisely.
I see. Okay.
So just showing you that the model captured the data quite well. This is the predicted probability of the server winning a point. And this is the actual frequency with which the servers win 1 point. And this is the predicted serve speed and the actual serve speed. As you can see, most of the data points are very close to the diagonal. So the predictions were quite accurate. This is also true for individual players, and the model captured quite well the difference in the probability of winning a point depending on whether the player is serving or receiving, and also it captured well the difference in the serve speed depending on whether it's a first serve or a second serve, which is another. Players usually serve slower in second serves because that's their final chance of getting it in. But what we're interested in is the interaction between controllability and prediction errors, and indeed we find exactly the predicted interaction. So in high control situation, the main effect is that positive prediction error make players worse, and positive prediction errors make them better. Negative prediction errors make them better. But because of the interaction shifts this relationship in the other direction. So in low control situation, when the game is more lopsided, then there's the opposite effect. Negative prediction errors make people play worse. Okay? And positive prediction errors make them play better. And we see the same effect on serve speed. So when the game is close, negative prediction errors make people serve faster, but when the game is lopsided, negative prediction errors make them serve slower. We saw more or less the same result in the second data set. The interaction was very clearly replicated. The baseline effect was partially replicated. Okay, so to sum up, what I showed you today, I presented a reinforcement learning framework of understanding learning in biological agent is driven by pleasure, by emotions, and moods. We saw how incorporating emotions and moods into our models essentially changes the models and also helps explain real life behavior. With respect to mood, we saw how we can understand moods as computational tools for generalizing across different outcomes. They encode recent changes and then they influence how we interpret or learn from subsequent changes, subsequent outcomes. And then we saw how learning in turn also influences subsequent mood. With respect to distinct emotions, we saw how the balance between value learning and policy learning emotions is shaped by the control, the degree of control that we estimate that we have over outcomes, and how this balance explains fluctuations in resource investment and consequently in performance. And finally, we saw how individual differences in both of these affective functions explains predispositions to mood and anxiety disorder. There are many future directions coming out of this work. I want to give just at least a little bit time for questions, But so I just want to, in this respect, I just want to make note again that our framework for incorporating emotions in cognitive science research can also be applied not just in humans but also in animals, because you don't actually need a direct measure of the emotions. You can assume the emotion as a latent variable in your model, and that's going to potentially explain additional variance in the behavior. So with that, I'd like to thank you for listening. Thanks to all the people involved in this work. So,
thank you very much. I wanted to ask, I think that mood may impact the learning rate, not necessarily the mood itself, but the delta mood. We also looked at delta moods from the previous, let's say from the previous state, because our interpretation of mood is also relative in a sense.
I think that's interesting, interesting idea. It is true. So, for example, all the mood predictions that I showed you, there were more delta mood than mood itself, because in each of these predictive models, the present mood is there as a covariate, and the predictive variable is the future mood, but the present mood accounts for a lot of the variance. So it's essentially like predicting the delta mood. I can't say, we didn't really, in looking at the relationship between present mood and learning, we didn't try what you suggest. We didn't try to essentially see whether the correlation is stronger with the change in mood as opposed to but it's definitely a possibility. So we'll check that.
Okay, thank you. Very interesting. We have some thought about how to account for constraints. For example, in the case of the tennis game, it's important that it's limited to half an hour, I don't know. And I didn't see that your model includes constraints on the resources or on the time or on something, because some of the behaviors might change depending on what are the resources and constraints that people are in the game. So if you play the game very quickly, or you know you have the whole day, or...
It's a question. So the funny thing about tennis matches is that they're not actually limited. They're definitely not limited in time, and sometimes they're not. They can go on forever, right? In particular.
Yeah, I guess I was thinking about soccer. Okay, but yeah, that's the point.
Yeah, but I think for sure, our model of these kind of decisions, how much resources to invest, can only account for a subset of factors, and not for all the factors that go into these decisions. So for us, we're happy that we've been able to show that there is this modulation, but the models can definitely be improved if the purpose is to capture the behavior as accurately as possible.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
כאילו בסט שלהם.
זה מספר, זה משהו אבסולוטי, משהו שאפשר באמת לכמת, זה משהו שהוא...
כל אחד נזכה לו
זאת אומרת, אני למשל שואל, האם יש דבר כזה קורה? אתה שאלת את השאלה בהתחלה, ולא ענית, כמו שאני. איך אתה מגדיר את זה באופן? האם זה מצב נפשי, קליטטיבי? כן.
אוקיי, אז האופן שבו אני חושב...
אני מסתכל על זה יש לי בראש שזה מצבים שהם קליטטיבי. לא יכול.
זה מצבים שהם
קליטטיבי. זאת אומרת, זה לא מספר, אתה לא יכול... גם כן הסקאלה יכולה אפילו...
כן, זה לא מספר, זה יש איזו עוצמה.
כן, בדיוק, אז הוא מדבר על עוצמה, אבל עוצמה זה לא יהיה מספר.
נכון, אבל אנשים, אנחנו מבקשים לאנשים לתרגם את העוצמה הזאת לאיזשהו מקום על הסקאלה. אז לפעמים זה נתרגם במספר.
עכשיו בסוף אתה מדבר על החיות. איך אתה עושה את זה עם חיות? אתה אמרת אני.
כן, כן, אז עם חיות... זהו, אבל בגלל שאני כבר עשו את זה, עכשיו יש לנו מודל של איך סביק שלנו, איך אתה להיות בניבוי.
זה לא יכול לעשות. אתה משתמש באותה תיאוריה, הוא סופג בו.
כן, לא, המטרה היא, כן. כן, בדיוק עכשיו אני אנסה. אבל לחיות, אבל הרגשות במודל הם נובעים מהמודל שלנו והם משפיעים על ההתנהגות.
זה הקונסיסטנטיות של הפרימה.
כן, אז אתה יכול להניח, אתה רואה שאם אתה מניח שיש אתה בדיוק.
זאת אומרת, זה פרוקסי, יש לך פרוקסי ל... Okay.
Hey, hi. So, remember we actually chatted in Zoom once.
Yeah, I remember vaguely.
Years
Can you remind me what
yes,
you're doing?
Yes, I'm working in decision making, but in rats. So.
Who do you work with?
With my so I'm a PA at ELSC.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's okay. I mean, I actually reached out to you.
Can you remind your name again?
Rona. Yes, so it was for a grant. I wanted to add your name as a potential collaborator because sometimes they want to know if there is any decision-making experience and things like that. Great stuff, actually. What I wanted to know is this issue of controllability, is this published already? The stories that you were saying, the second half?
No, we were just, this is very new data, we didn't even write it up yet.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, this idea is quite interesting. So first of all, if I have to operationally define controllability, then probably the example that you said in the tennis match, that probably makes, is how I would define it, right? So it's the ability to change the outcome given you change your own effort, right? So that's how we can define. I mean, I can try to think of rodent experiments also like that, where they have controllability on the outcome, and then the idea would be to understand how that affects their action values, right? So that sounds like a very interesting research question. Because most studies that we do, you know, these are bandit tasks and stuff. So I'm working in navigation decision, but like in bandit tasks and stuff, the action values are pretty fixed.
Yeah.
Or the reversal task or whatever, but animals don't have active control a lot of time over these sort of things. in navigation it's slightly different because it depends on your ability to solve the task and so on.
But I think you can may potentially implement that in RAT with making it so that if you press at a certain rate, then you increase the probability of getting the reward.
Right.
Right?
Yes, that's what I was getting at. So it would be under the control of the animal, and then. But then, I mean, what would you think would be the neural substrates that we can focus on if we did an experiment like that? So action values, fine. I mean, there are probably several brain areas implicated in anterior cingulate and parts of the striatum and stuff like that. But if I want to understand, right, this is a bit deeper than that, right? So your ability to influence the action value. How do you even, like, what would be the what can be the neural substrate of that?
The most relevant work that I know about this is work by Amitai Shinhal and John Cohen about the expected value of control. Their claim is that the expected value of control is encoded by anterior cingulate cortex. Yeah, so that's literally, it's literally.
So it all comes down to the anterior cingulate.
Yeah, but I don't know. I don't think that it's all kind of their theory is based on indirect observations of, like, activation of the anterior cingulate correlates with task difficulty and things like that.
Exactly.
It's not really measuring that.
Right. Exactly. I mean, it's also implicated in, rodents also implicated in your willingness to be effortful. Right? I think that's the case in humans as well. I think it has been implicated in that. So these are interesting things. I'm like trying to rigorously see a neural substrate for this, like your desire to control the environment. It's something that would be a very interesting thing to study, I feel.
Yeah. Another work that I think is related to this is the work on tonic dopamine that's representing the reward rate and response vigor.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's the two things that are related. I would be very interested in studying these things. Obviously, I don't have an animal lab.
Right, which is, it could be, let me see, currently we have a few projects running, but if I want to get into this line, maybe I can get in touch with you and we can think of some collaborations with
definitely.
animal, human.
Definitely.
Kind of. Awesome.
Great.
Very nice meeting you again.
Thank you.
Right.
Bye.